Now, hypothetically, it's an attitude of skepticism, irony towards rejection of grand narratives, ideologies, and universalism, criticizes objective notions of reason, human nature, social progress, absolute truth, and objective reality. It's predicated on the idea that the reason that you categorize, especially, the reason that you categorize is to marginalize. You categorize to marginalize to obtain power. Power is pretty much all there is. There's other elements of postmodernism. One of them is that human nature is merely a social construct. See, the reason for that, as far as I'm concerned, and this is a postmodern critique as well, I'm going to move the center to the margin and the margin to the centers. Why would you think that human nature is only a social construct? Well, here's why. It's because that means you could construct it any way you want to. That was a very common idea among the communists. You know, that's why Mao wanted to wipe out Chinese history. That's why the Red Guard went around in China and tried to destroy everything, every element of China's history prior to approximately 1960. Right, that great culture, thousands and thousands of years old. As well, so you could bring in the new man. Well, what was the new man? Well, it was whatever slave Mao happened to fantasize about. Or it was the utopian person. You take your pick, but like I said, if you take a look at the corpses, you can pretty much figure out which of those two it was. So what's up with these people? These deconstructionists, these postmodernists. What are they up to exactly? Well, here's the first thing. They came about pretty much when Marxism was no longer credible, no longer tenable as a set of intellectual propositions. Now, if you were a French intellectual, you had to have a lot of corpses piled at your feet before you were willing to think that you were wrong. So, here's an example. I don't remember his name. He was the architect of the killing fields in Cambodia. It wasn't Pol Pot, it was one of his advisors. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name. He took his PhD at the Sorbonne. And he developed the thesis in the Sorbonne, Marxist thesis, that the cities were parasites on the land. You know, it's an extension of the whole bourgeoisie proletariat thing. The cities were full of bourgeois types, educated parasites, essentially, who were doing nothing but stealing what was rightly the farmers. So when he came back to Cambodia, he put that into action and emptied out the cities and put all the intellectuals and the city dwellers either to death or to work, which generally resulted in death, and killed about 1/6 to 1/4 of the population. But he got his PhD from the Sorbonne. And that's a good story because that's exactly how complicit the Western leftist intellectuals were in facilitating the horrors of the 20th century. And it's not like we've learned anything since then. Quite the contrary. We've just gone underground. And that's what I see when I see postmodernism. So what happened was, despite the affinity of Western intellectuals for Marxism, maybe because they weren't paid as much as bankers, let's say, if we're being cynical about it. Because I've often thought that if you paid sociologists as much as investment bankers, they'd be capitalist very rapidly. Well, which is also to say that you may underpay intellectuals at your peril. And you know, that's actually dangerous because one of the things that's happening is that as the universities have become corporatized and corrupted in a variety of ways, more and more of the professors are adjuncts, right? I think it's up to 30, 40, 50%, something like that now. They've got no tenure, they've got no job security, and they're paid like $24,000 a year. It's not a good idea to radicalize the people that are teaching your children. But anyways, by the end of the 60s, so much data on the catastrophic failures of communism had accrued that even the most intransigent of French intellectuals had to admit that the jig was up. But that's a problem because that's the whole ideology, right? That's the whole raison d'etre, he says in his terrible Alberta French. You're going to just give that up? What are you going to do after that? Well, what happened was postmodernism was invented. And so it's a sleight of hand, as far as I can tell. So, and with postmodernism, identity politics. And so the postmodern transformation is, well, we were a little wrong with the working class thing. Turns out that communists kill them all and capitalists make them all rich, and that's actually exactly the opposite of what we predicted. But maybe there's still a way this could be salvaged. How about if we don't say working class capitalist, we say oppressor oppressed. We'll just transform the terminology a bit, and we'll start thinking about all the other ways that people are oppressed, and all the other ways that people are oppressors, and then we can play the same damn game under a new guise. And now look, the postmodernists were Marxists, so let's make no mistake about that. Derrida himself said that postmodernism was a transformation of Marxism. I'm not making this up. The question is why? Well, because you could say, well, postmodernism is a valid philosophical school, and we'll get into that for a minute, and they make some valid claims. One of them, for example, this is a central postmodernist claim, is that there's an infinite number of ways of interpreting the world, and that actually turns out to be technically correct. Part of the reason that we've had a very difficult time building robots, AI robots, that can operate in the real world is because perceiving the real world turns out to be so difficult that we really can't figure out how human beings do it, because it is susceptible to an infinite number of interpretations. So that's actually correct. Now, I'm not going to give the postmodernists a tremendous amount of credit for discovering that, because it was discovered simultaneously in about 5 disciplines at pretty much the same time, but you give the devil his due.